down the way around.
This is another thing.
All right, although we don't see the Buffalo Room, it is available by audio. We're not expecting any members of the committee to participate from Buffalo today. So good morning. I still have a mask on, but my name is Shoshana, and everyone can remember me. I think we have 6 members present, and I think we are expecting one more eventually, but we don't yet have him here. Peter is not yet arrived. But in the interest of beginning, because I know, David, you may have to leave us.
I'm actually okay. I moved my other meeting. So.
Okay, great. Then we don't have that worry.
Yeah,
we had just juggled a little bit the agenda a tiny bit just to make sure that we did the vote first, so that in case we lost you, we had you available to cast your vote. So why don't we do a brief roll call of the members, and then my staff and I will introduce ourselves again, and then we can get started. So in Albany, we have, as from members, we'll go around the table.
Stephen Waters from the Rome Sentinel.
Ian McCallum from the New York State Office of General Services.
Amanda DeSantis from the Lieutenant Governor's Office.
Okay, and in members in New York City, we have.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Zoila Del Castillo, Deputy Secretary of State for Economic Opportunities. It's my second time joining and my first time in person. So I'm happy to meet everyone in person here.
Franklin Stone, I'm the Assembly's representative, appointee.
And I'm Dave Schultz. I'm appointment.
Okay, and again, I'm Shoshana Bule, and with me in the room are my staff, and they'll introduce themselves.
Kristen Smith,
Candace Watson.
Kristen O'Neill.
Jake Borkin.
Hello, everybody. Again, so we do have 6 where we have a quorum. Again, we are
We
expecting
have
Peter.
one observer in the room too, just so you know.
Oh, I'm
There's a
sorry, I
couple-
didn't
over here, you
see
probably
that.
can't see.
Hello.
Hello.
You don't have to identify yourself unless you want to, but welcome. We had, I had moved to the top of the agenda, but we don't need to deal with it now if David is going to be able to stay and continue with us throughout the session. The post-hearing vote on the possible adoption of our proposed resolution and guidelines concerning implementation of 103A. You probably will remember we did have a hearing on this issue about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago now, and we didn't have any feedback from the general public objecting or supporting, for that matter, the adoption of this proposed resolution, which the committee members had approved in principle to go forward with at our last meeting. So I would ask for a motion to approve or adopt this resolution if you would like it. So if anyone has that motion, I would ask for it. So
I will
not
move.
I'll make
I
the
will
motion.
move.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Okay, so
Second.
can we vote? Anyone against the adoption of this resolution and proposed guidelines that were the subject of our public hearing? Okay, hearing no objection, the resolution is adopted and the proposed rules are adopted, and we will remove the draft stamps, and we will post these on our website. And in the event in the future, if a member has an extraordinary circumstance, we will, and we have a quorum otherwise meeting in person, we will be able to proceed with someone joining us from a non-public location pursuant to our guidelines. Great. So we can move on to the adoption of our minutes from our last meeting, which are, again, have been posted as documents to be discussed today. Is there a motion to adopt these minutes?
I move it.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Excellent. Is anyone against the approval of these minutes? All right, hearing no
I think
objection.
it's a
and
call
minutes
for
are-
discussion, not. I think it's
I'm sorry?
actually a call. I think it's actually a call for discussion, but the net may be the same. Does anyone have any comments or want to discuss the
Do you
minutes?
have comments or revisions suggested before the vote?
I think
I don't
did
have any. I'm
offer
just
them
following
initially.
Robert's rules.
But if there are none, then we can finish the
Yeah, like I
vote.
said, I think I
We
called for amendments and revisions already earlier in the process, but I'm happy to have them discussed again now if they need to be. And if there's anyone with those feedback, please let me know. Okay, hearing none. They're approved.
No, we needed to have a vote. Did we vote? I don't think we voted.
Okay, we can move on to the
I'm a
next.
Robert's guy.
Franklin, did you have something before I moved on?
No, did we actually vote after the discussion? I just didn't hear it.
yes,
We
we
did?
did.
I
Okay.
asked for an objection and I heard
There were no
none, but
objections,
if-
yeah.
Okay.
If you'd like to place an objection, Franklin, I'm happy to hear it.
No, I had no objection. My objection was just, I wanted to follow Robert's rules. That was my only concern.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll move on and provide a brief report on the activities of the committee this summer, in the summer months since June. We've had approximately 500 plus phone calls concerning our areas of remit and 500 informal advisory opinions offered by in writing over the summer. We've got approximately 1,300 further appeals from agencies who are who had appeals taken of their FOIL decisions. Over the summer, we had 11 live or virtual presentations of one form or another with about 1,700 participants and issued 8 formal advisory opinions. Putting the numbers together for everyone year over year from since our last annual report was issued in November, the end of November of last year. We've got about 1,458 phone advices, about 1,600 written advices, 30 formal advisory opinions, 41 presentations attended by approximately 4,500 people, and about 4,000 appeals that we have reviewed. So those are the pieces of information. They will be reflected with specificity in the minutes. Oh, and we're joined by Peter.
I have what I hope is a quick question that I think bears on our annual report. These 1,300 appeals that you've received, what, if anything, do you do with them to analyze them, collect them, organize them as they come in?
Oh, as we've discussed a number of times in the past, Franklin, we review each one, and if there are issues that we feel are sort of real flags for us one way or another, we might reach out and provide proactive advice to the agency if we see issues that we feel are sort of deviations from the standard that is ordinary. And then we track various fields of data associated with the receipt of those appeals, such that if somebody asks us for all appeals sent to us by a certain agency, we are able to track that and provide that piece of information back to the FOIL requester.
Briefly, what did we learn from the appeals?
So what we learned is that people don't like it when it takes a long time for their FOIL determinations, and they don't like it when agencies take longer than 20 business days to respond to their Freedom of Information Law requests. I would say that's the largest theme that we see. And that's year over year, the same themes that we do see. And again, this tracking and monitoring of the tracking and the ability to, go ahead, David.
Oh, no, I was waiting for you to finish.
Okay, the tracking and the ability to respond to FOIL requests associated with appeals on some kind of differentiated level represents a new practice from historical practice. We recently started tracking those pieces of information so that we could be more responsive to requesters who are interested in those pieces of data.
Yeah, that was my question. Could you say more about what you mean when you say we track it by agency? And are we generating numbers that can go into our report in terms of agencies and their number of appeals, things like that?
Well, we certainly could provide those pieces of information in our report with an asterisk, you know, because we receive as many as we receive, we can accurately report on. Again, an issue that we sense may be happening but don't have insight deeply into is the possibility that we don't receive every single appeal that we should. And we have talked about adding that piece of information to our training and talking about it with people who are agencies, and we do that now. But we every now and then we receive an anecdotal piece of information that we might not have all the appeals that we should. When somebody contacts us and says, "Did you receive my appeal?" and the determination that the agency gave to me, and every now and then we are unable to track that down. And so it's not clear whether they haven't actually appealed or the agency didn't send it to us or some combination of factors.
Right.
So again, we won't be able to have hard data, but this is what we can pursue it. We can provide some information.
Yeah. So and just,
sorry, David,
just to follow up on that for a second. So under the current system, the agency has to send you the appeal or their resolution of the appeal?
Both.
Both. And do you track the number of cases where an appeal results in a changed position as opposed to just sticking to it?
No, it's impossible to track that. It's because there's the chart would become infinitely long. That, you know, every time there's a change, it could represent. A lot of times, what we hear is we're sending this in 20 days. We think that this deserves a new look, and so they don't actually do what they're supposed to do and render a decision. Their decision is to refer it back to the agency, which their own people, which we don't believe is proper, and we might say that, but it doesn't, to chart that kind of information, it's not so helpful. We then would get a potentially revised, like the FOIL officer might revise their position and there might not result in another appeal, and then we would never know that.
Yeah, so I guess this is just one area where I think it would be interesting to explore. I think it's great that you're starting to track this and keep numbers, but I guess I would think there is a way to capture useful information. For example, if an appeal person says, no, you got to redo this, that suggests something was wrong. And whether you know if it ultimately changes, there's a way at least to find out within an agency what percentage of appeals the appeals officer decides something wasn't done right. And that would suggest a need for training. You know, if 90% of the appeals result in some action or another, it would be different than if, 5% of the appeals result in action. It just seems there's a useful information.
I'll have to discuss this mechanics of this with my staff, and perhaps next time we can talk to you about what we've discovered we can do with reasonableness. There's the potential that this could be the kind of project that would require the investment of time, which might become a burden to do this, but we could potentially do some of this work if we'll talk amongst ourselves and decide and figure out what we can propose to you as a next step in that process.
Terrific, thank you.
Yeah, I think this has been very useful to discuss again and again. A follow-up question, how much of this data that you're currently generating is available as part of push information to the public? And if it's not being pushed out, do we just wait for somebody to request it? How is it shared with the public?
It's a document that's been requested a number of times, and we provide it.
You provide it, but we don't push it. We don't have it available for someone just to download on the website.
I don't have a ton of confidence that the log that we are making it reflects accurately that which we receive, but I don't know how to characterize its usefulness.
I understand that. I just was asking the question of what you did, and the answer is no, it's not just made available, but if someone requests it, it is made available
Yes,
in
But I think I
whole
hear you.
or in part.
What I think
in
I-
whole if they want it, or whatever
Okay.
parts they're interested in.
Okay.
What I think I hear you saying about the data, it's almost like COVID tracking when people started testing at home versus testing at facilities. The data now is no longer as relevant because we don't have all of the information. So you can only compare it to what you have through that's received by you, not what's out there with home testing, for example, right?
But
Yeah,
an
something
important-
quite like that.
Yeah.
It's
But an important difference is the agencies are required by law to provide it to us.
Yes. Yes.
So
They certainly
in
are.
theory, it should be good data, and the fact that it isn't good data is a little troubling too.
Well, again, I don't even know that it isn't. I
Right.
anecdotally, there's a possibility that we're missing a few, and I don't know exactly what the volume of what we're missing, if we're missing anything, is.
If we
Okay.
want to avoid missing anything, then it would seem that if an appellant says, I appeal this, they should receive from that agency some sort of written or emailed notification, thank you for your appeal on such and such a date, that then the appellant would be able to say, I appealed it on this date. In other words, there doesn't appear to be any sort of communication from the agency back to the person appealing saying, thank you for your appeal. That would get rid of the ambiguity of whether they're all tracked or not.
Well, I mean, I guess what happens is that a FOIL requester might get a partial or whole denial and then appeal that partial or whole denial to the agency. The agency then has 10 business days to respond to that appeal with a substantive decision.
But there's no
And that decision
there's no
is-
stamp that says, thank you for your appeal. We will get reply within 10 days.
What value would that add is what I'm asking.
If there's ambiguity in whether something has been appealed or not.
No, I
It's
think
not
the
about whether it's
ambiguity
been
is whether
appealed,
we've
it's whether
received it.
we've received it.
So we're sort of a CC. Generally speaking, most agencies, when they
Okay.
determine an appeal, it's usually a letter, and at the end of it, there's a CC, and it's usually CC'd to the committee.
Okay.
And then that would reflect at least a desire to copy us. I don't know, it may not be a whole come to fruition if it doesn't actually get sent to us, but generally, I think we receive, I think state agencies are all sending us what they need to send us. I think that if there's a problem, it may exist at the local agency, local FOIL responsible agency level, and there's many different agencies that that are FOIL responsible that we don't think of necessarily as an agency, but
Okay.
in common parlance. But again, we have added sort of this concept, this reminder to when we discuss this obligation in the form of training. We've definitely remind people that this is a piece of the law, it is required. And generally speaking, I think that there's broad compliance. Again, anecdotally, there may not be. And so I would want to make sure that any reliance on that log took into consideration the fact that we may not be seeing everything that we need to see. So to the extent that it showed hundreds of somethings, it may not be disproportionate to anything else if we're not seeing the hundreds of something else's. So, but yes, it's definitely a document that we have disclosed for whatever utility people might want to make of it. It's available.
You mentioned training. I have another follow-up question. There have been, I think you said 47 presentations. 41 since our last annual, how many?
21.
21.
41?
41,
Like
okay.
41.
My question is, this is since our last annual report, so since last December 1st, how many, if any, were in person?
I have done none in person, but they haven't been asked of me to do them in person. Everyone who's asked me has asked me if I could join them by Zoom. And Kristen, how many have you and your team done in person?
It's a good question that I'm going to have to get back to you in about hopefully a minute.
She's gonna look.
I understand if somebody asks, you're responding, but are we making it clear that as in the past, we are offering in-person training? Because certainly other agencies are offering it in person now, and I just don't want to be behind the curve on that.
We're not behind.
Because I've attended in-person ones, and they are a damn sight better than Zoom ones on a lot of levels.
Well, that's interesting to hear because we've actually heard the opposite feedback, but, we're maybe.
Well, I
maybe
understand
that
if you're
might look
sitting at
us
home
in
in
the eye,
your
I don't know.
pajamas, it's preferable, but for people who
Sure.
are coming in the
But
office.
I know that I have signed a lot of travel vouchers for Kristen and her team over the last, months, so I'm sure
As
that
of yesterday, 24.
24 were in person as of yesterday.
And you've done them all, Kristen.
I do the majority. I think I've done all of the in-person.
All of the in person, and we've shared the virtual workload.
Okay.
And yes, that's my report on our activities over the summer and since the last annual report, which represents a little bit of review from our last June meeting.
Just back to the training for a moment, just so that it's clear, especially for new members. My recollection, again anecdotal, is that Kristen and Bob were collectively doing several a week. Is that right, Kristen?
That's not correct.
Before COVID?
No, that's not correct.
I don't have an old annual report here. It seemed to me I'm just concerned that there are agencies we're missing if we've only done 41. And I know we
That's
did
great.
more training.
What's always, the way it's always worked since I've been here, and I feel confident, I think, Candace can speak to this too, is we go where we're invited. I mean, I have proactively started offering these virtual programs, pretty much every month, unless, that one particular month I am not able to fit it in, but I do the virtual programs on my own. But the way that staff has always worked in terms of providing this programming is the organization reaches out to us and we respond. And that's what we continue to do. Every time an entity reaches out to us to request training, we provide that training.
Oh, I understand that. 41 just seemed to me to be a big drop from what we were doing pre-COVID. And it's easy enough to look it up in the annual reports. And I just was concerned that there might be agencies that we should reach out to that we used to train, that we're missing some. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we only did 25 a year. My recollection was that you were doing considerably more than that pre-COVID. But maybe my recollection is wrong. I just want to raise
There
the
may
issue.
have been certain weeks where we did, a couple a week, but that was certainly not the norm.
Okay, well, maybe my
I'll just point
recollection is wrong.
Just point out, Franklin, that pre-COVID, however many there turn out to have been, and we'll just have to, look at that number, we are training thousands more people now.
I know, but
So-
you may be missing a whole agency is my point. You may
I'm not
have,
sure
all of the
agency.
Department of State coming, but if you've missed agencies in New York City, then perhaps we ought to look at who we've trained in the past and make sure they know we're open for business. That's my point. I'm not trying to
Basically,
fault them.
what you're asking is, who do we want to train that we might be missing? And that's just a very short question for a future
Exactly.
future time.
And I think
Exactly.
just another point that we can make is that the same entities that have asked us to join them for their annual trainings continue to ask us to do that. NICOM and other sort of large, entities that have constituencies that represent those small agencies across the state that are FOIL responsible and OML responsible continue to ask us to provide input at their training and do sessions, and we still do those. The bar still asks us to do stuff. So while we may not have everyone from a particular agency joining us, we may have the FOIL officer from that agency who joins us. Or
Right.
the
Well, I
person-
just ask that you take a look at it and see if we're missing some people that we should be reaching out to.
Can I just say, for example, in 2019, I'm looking at the 2019 annual report, which was the last year under our former last full year under our former executive director. We gave 47 presentations
in an entire year.
in an entire year.
And so we're talking about
Okay.
3/4 of a year, and we did 41.
Okay. Okay, my recollection was wrong. I'm delighted to hear that. But the point is that Steve articulated is correct. We ought to be seeing who isn't asking us, because there are an awful lot of people that could, for whom training
I suspect it's more local.
And then we have representative
Yeah.
groups that push that stuff out and keep it on their website and offer it,
Yep.
on an as requested, as needed basis. We've started again to receive the groups of international graduate and high-level student and programs for business people and other professionals coming across. I think we had one group from Pakistan and one group from a bunch of countries in Africa come and talk to us about, systems of open government, and those are fascinating, interesting opportunities, and we had 2 of those this last period. I gave a few CLEs to law school classes that'll be used in various curricula going forward, and spoke to PBS last month, television, about some of the new things that were happening in open government laws. So I think some of these things may be reaching audiences that we don't necessarily know about or target, but they could potentially reach those audiences through sharing of links and other things. And we do quite frequently get requests from people to direct them to how they can view an older training or a different, like a training sort of on an ad hoc basis, and we point them to the place on our website where those are stored. So unless there are further questions associated with this last agenda item, we can potentially move on to the next one, which is just subject matters that the committee members may be thinking would be ripe for discussion in the upcoming annual report that we'll be filing in December.
Again?
Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, we're just moved on to number 5 on the agenda.
I'm just gonna make a note here. Let's not mute the.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Shauna.
Oh, right. I guess to the extent that we are trying to have other people who may be listening on the phone need to hear us, we probably shouldn't be muting the microphone in any of the rooms that we're broadcasting from. Okay, so number 5, I included in this agenda some items that continue to come up for my staff and me as we hear from people, as sort of jumping off points for potential subject matters for our report. None of them will surprise or shock you, because they are items that we hear about every year and continue to have people wish that things would be different or clarified. The most current of those is the 50A sequelae in the litigation that continues to make its way through the courts, and then rounding it off with continued FOIL extensions by agencies and whether those are proper. And again, courts have sort of split, but largely are agreeing that they are proper. So if the legislature doesn't think they're proper, then we maybe need to hear from them. And then the chestnut about additional oversight of FOIL and whether a centralized agency should be doing that. And then we can talk briefly, if we want to, about any of the experience that we've heard about in the very brief time. I guess it's 2 days since Chapter 56 has really been effective, and a couple months since people have learned that it was going to be effective and planned their futures based on that. Willing to hear from anyone on other topics and including, David, your topic that was number 6. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to make the point. Number 6 was intended to be a part of something for our report, not a separate discussion.
No, I get it. I did understand that, but I just wanted to make sure that it was clarified, that it was a continuation of a discussion that we've been having. And I don't know whether we had really honed in on a direction about that and so happy to We can squeeze
one-
5 and 6 together.
And one other item, just I think we should add on, there is a bill in the legislature now, as I understand it, that would deal with this question of agencies sort of outsourcing to nonprofits, various governmental functions, which has been on our report in the past, and I think we should talk about that.
Okay.
Outsourcing, period. It doesn't necessarily
Well,
have to
no,
be.
it's, I think the basic issue has been that particularly public universities and others have created kind of nonprofit organizations that they then turn things over to, like their sports programs, so that none of the expenditures are available to the public. And that's just one example. But there is a bill, I think it's 8925, that addresses this. And I know in past reports, it's an issue we took up. It's somewhat complicated about how you define entities that are doing governmental work that aren't agencies within the meaning of the statute. But I think it's an important issue because it's happening more and more.
Well, I think another approach to that is, to me, a more simple approach to that problem is whether the entity, private or public, is holding the material or the information on behalf of the public FOIL responsible entity. So either direction,
Well,
if it can be argued that the entity, the not-for-profit, the private, the super secret behind closed door entity is holding material, records on behalf of or for, that could be, that's already makes it a public record.
That's certainly true, but that doesn't solve the problem. That gets part of the problem. The problem is when the entity is given authority to engage in what previously would be considered governmental business. For example, if you created a non-for-profit prison and the state sent 300 prisoners there, we wouldn't expect that even though the prison is creating and making its own records, those would no longer be available to the public under FOIL. So you're right that you can define the records that an agency gives to them as things that still are FOILable, but you also have to reach records that are created and made by that entity in carrying out a governmental function. And as I say, the bill 8925, which I only had a chance to skim this week, addresses this, and I think it's a thoughtful way. And again, I just think if we're identifying things in our report, I think we should comment on that bill, good aspects of it, things we need to think might be refined, or just raising the point that it is an ongoing issue and we think the legislature needs to look, but I think it should be part of our report.
Sure. We'll look at that. We'll make sure we'll figure out exactly the bill. A or S, are you?
Senate.
The Senate.
And what the Senate bill does actually is take consultant reports outside the realm of interagency material. So it's an exception to the interagency material exception.
I think there's more
I
than one
might
bill
look
currently
at the bill.
proposed, so we'll have to take a look and compare.
Yeah, 8925 is the one basically it just adds another Roman numeral to the exceptions to the interagency exception.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I guess both Kristins were able to find it on their legislation tracking sheets, and this Kristin is able to find another one. Kristen S. is able to find another one.
It's a good point, worth listening to.
Yeah, so we'll put it together as a section for discussion in our draft.
Yeah, and if I miscited the bill, it might have been 8926. I looked at two of them last night or yesterday, but one of them clearly deals with this issue in depth and defines, what constitutes governmental conduct subject to FOIA.
Okay.
So.
So just for purposes of the beginning of drafting, we'll certainly take that on we'll examine these bills and we'll figure out which one it is that you're specifically referring to, if it isn't the one we just talked about, and we'll do that. But on the agenda item here, 5A, just for ease of reference, we'll update the current state of the duking of it out. I still think that, there are obviously two ways to go. One is the Court of Appeals can weigh in on some definitive way that's not fact specific or specific to only a very small factual predicate, or the legislature can take it up and clarify what it meant. And then, B, we can continue to discuss the feedback that we're getting. People continue to be frustrated. People have always been frustrated by this issue of repeated extensions. They continue to be frustrated by it. The courts are not really helping the people who are frustrated. So we can raise it again as a flag, which we've done in the past. Yes.
So I think one thing we could do, we did in our report last year have a few paragraphs at the end explaining that some courts were kind of off track in what we understood to be the legislative intent. I think one thing that might help in this report is to amplify that. And I think some of the confusion flows from the opinion letter that was issued by the committee very early on in this, that is being misconstrued in various ways. And so one thing we might do as a way of framing this in our report is clarify what we understand the intent to be and clarifying what was meant by the opinion, which is being misconstrued.
Do you know
just so
I don't know what we're talking about. Sorry, I don't know which opinion we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but very shortly after the bill was passed, the committee issued a formal opinion about its scope.
Are you talking about 50A, David?
Yeah, isn't that where we are?
Okay, I thought we were talking about repeated extensions. That's why Kristen and I.
I'm sorry. I jumped ahead in looking at the agenda. Take it off.
No, I think the issue of you're talking about unsubstantiated versus substantiated report, the early opinion on that. Yeah, that it continues to be how the court interprets, and it has historically been how the courts interpreted the issue, and it continues to be how the courts interpret the issue. So we can clarify that we were relying on the long line of courts interpreting the issue in that way. I think that the legislative history, the only telling part of the legislative history is that the bill memos that talked about clarifying an intention didn't make it into the bill that actually passed. So that was a different bill, and it didn't move forward. So those bill memos that contain any of those clarified thoughts aren't associated with a bill that passed. So to the extent that we can talk about the fact that in the historical documents, there have been some bill memos that talked about an intention on one side of this issue and some that have talked about an intention on the other side of this issue, and that to the extent that anyone wanted clarity on that, they would maybe have to pick. We can certainly delve down to that level of detail. So then we had moved on to number B, but we can continue to talk about number A if there's still appetite for that.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think it is an important issue, and it's still being litigated a lot. Mm-hmm. And that clarifying as much as we can in our report, building on what we said last year, and maybe working together what was said in that opinion and what we understand the legislative intent to be, to provide some guidance would be a useful thing to do.
Yeah, again, happy to take a crack at it. It's not clear what the legislative intent was since it was not incorporated into the bill that actually moved forward. But it was out there, so they could have chosen to incorporate it, so it's hard to know what they actually meant when they didn't. And then again, another issue of intent is on the issue of repeated extensions. Courts have definitely gone one way on this pretty consistently. And it's always been the opinion of the committee and the director and staff that there's nothing in FOIL that would permit it. Therefore, when we have opined, we say there's nothing in FOIL that permits this repeated extension by the agency. However, there's nothing in the legislative history that addresses it, and courts have seemed to interpret it as being not prohibited. So we can tee that up again because it continues to be a real issue,
it's
frustrating.
It's a very political issue,
It's certainly,
not a legislative issue, or not a FOIL issue.
Well, I mean, I guess it could be a FOIL issue. They could say this is it, and then but here's what would happen. Tremendous additional numbers of cases would be appealed, and tremendous numbers of additional 78s potentially would be taken. I don't actually know. It's very difficult to take a 7 to 8, everybody knows that, unless you are well-funded and well-organized and perhaps organizational as opposed to individual. So it might impose an additional burden for someone to draw a line in the sand and say, this is the thing beyond which you will not go. And the remedy for it is file a lawsuit. So again, it goes hand in hand with maybe we're talking about different kinds of remedies for different kinds of potential failures to comply with what may ultimately be a clarified version of the deadlines. And we have proposed in the past that the legislature, including in the last annual report, that the legislature take a crack at clarifying how long is too long.
Or when and why.
Right. So we can we'll reprise that. We'll try to add any new thinking and feedback that we've received in the last period to those arguments.
Shoshana, just to, we did talk about this last time, and I know it's in our report, but just as you're drafting it, just to go on the record, my view is that there's an inherent problem in a one-size-fits-all deadline, given the complexity of various FOIL requests and the record-keeping system at various agencies. So I do think the legislature needs to address it, but it should address it in a way that sets some kind of a standard about reasonableness, rather than saying everything must be done in 25 days or something. And I at least would advocate that as part of our proposal, that it's an issue that needs to be dealt with, but in a way that accounts for the realistic needs of various agencies.
I think you're 100% right, David, and I think that's how courts have addressed it. And what they have found is that every time that they issue a decision that stands for the proposition that a repeated extension isn't prohibited, it's very fact specific. It really addresses the reasonableness of the response of the responding agency. So even there, it's hard to sort of make it a hard and fast kind of rule. So, we might be gilding the lily by having the legislature also say that it's a rule of reasonableness, but I think it's the only approach that's meaningful, that will work at all.
Right. But one thing we might do is in the report, identify things that should be factored into considering the reasonableness, which could include things like the backlog of cases at a particular agency, the average length of time
so
for an agency.
those factors are in our regulations already, and that's what we often will point to when we are providing our opinion on whether an agency's date certain is reasonable. We say, well, these are the things that the committee in its regulations has said should be included in those regulations. Again, they have the force of law, and so there's that's really the meat and potatoes. That's the business that we're in as the committee when we respond to these kinds of problems. This is what we can say. So to the extent that those are incorporated into the statute or some other kind of list we could make that point.
And so just one follow-up, I mean, you're right, and that highlights one other issue that we should probably raise with the legislature, is that you can only decide if something's reasonable and if adequate resources are being devoted if you have the data. And right now, for example, I don't think we have good data on like how many FOIL requests are filed with the New York Police Department, how long they're pending, how many never get answered. So there is a need in our system for some data collection, and there should be a way to do that relatively inexpensively, if someone sits down and thinks about how you do that. So I just think it's another piece that goes into this issue about length of time, is that we're kind of walking around in a dark room and we don't really know what to do.
Yeah, I think that that those data probably do exist. They are just, as Franklin pointed out earlier, not proactively shared by every agency, but they are actually required to. When I was at an agency, we kept a log and it contained those data.
Right. So maybe we should suggest to the legislature that data is reported to the Committee on Open Government and put on our website on an annual basis, something like that. I know that the New York Comptroller at various times has done audits of city agencies, the New York City Comptroller. But again, it's not available to the public, and therefore it's not really available to the courts if they're trying to decide, an agency says I can't get to this for 3 years, and they don't know if that's because of the request or because they just don't have the resources to do it, or what the reason is.
That's a lot of charts that we'd be getting. That's a full employment act for.
Building an empire, Chris, building an empire.
Yeah, that's definitely not in my plan, but we'll take it if it comes. And so moving on to another issue that we've touched on in the past, with varying levels of depth, and that is the concept of additional oversight over compliance with FOIL, specifically FOIL. And we again, in our last report, we sort of, it was like a trial balloon, I guess, that kind of lifted. I continue, that's the question that whenever I'm interviewed or asked, that's always the question I get asked, is if somebody gave you, all the resources in the world, would you like to, oversee FOIL compliance? It's hard to imagine what resources would be required for such a thing because of the variability in the subject matter. But again, we can talk about in the report if you guys are interested in other rubrics or other constructs that in a more centralized way offer kind of more consistent FOIL oversight. It's I guess there's views on both sides of it, and I'm sure that those views are held by people in this room. So to the extent you guys want to duke it out and discuss it and have it be reflected in a portion of the report, happy to hear and write.
So one proposal to do this is in 89, whatever it is, 26. And I think, I don't know that gets the right. It seems to me to be a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of things. It's kind of a new mediation process and a mandatory appeal process. And it just seems like the bill isn't well thought through. But Chris, I would suggest, Shoshana, the reason that this is important is what you were just articulating, that most people who file FOIA requests don't have a big organization and resources to go to court and do things. And one thing that the system would do is to create a system that would allow an individual who doesn't get satisfaction from an agency a cheap, inexpensive way to get an outside or an independent review without having to hire a lawyer and go to court. If the system were structured correctly. And we've talked about this before, that Pennsylvania and Ohio are two examples. They take different approaches, but they have systems where it's very easy. It's sort of like what you do here now. You do an administrative appeal, but instead of just sending it to someone else in the agency and hearing back in a month or 3 months, you would go to an independent person with the appeal, and that person would have the authority to require the agency to submit the documents and issue an opinion that the agency would have to comply with on an expedited basis. So I think it's worth exploring. I don't know that I know there are problems and issues, and you don't want to create an initial administrative layer that slows things down and doesn't work. But there are examples of this working to improve the process that other states have adopted. And I do think it's something that should be raised in our report as an issue the legislature should be pursuing.
Yeah, we absolutely can do that. I think we can sharpen up even, prior attempts at focusing their attention. And there are bills every year, as you point out, this is maybe a new one, but there are bills that come up every year that would transform this group from an advisory group to a decision-making determinative group in some form or fashion. It's, the mechanics are complicated, and the fiscal will probably be large. Among the things that people would probably need to consider would be just the volume that we are getting right now, just as the recipient of appeals. Those would all be substantive determinations rather than potential possible advice-giving scenarios. And then when you are a fact finder, you need to have expertise to a certain extent about the subject matters of the records that you're examining. So you can't when a court takes judicial notice of or in camera reviews a stack of materials that are in issue in a FOIL challenge, it has the luxury of asking the litigants to give those pieces of information that it requires in order to make determinations like, is this an interagency document, or was it sent to somebody outside the agency and is no longer an interagency document? And what is this about? This environmental document, this health document, this transportation document, this correctional document. What are these about? What are these even saying? What does this infrastructure document mean? Is it a state secret? Is it infrastructure related that in such a way that it would imperil the life or safety of some? So all these decisions would then have to be made by whatever group was, and it could be 6 subject matters a day, which again, it just might, you say that you don't want to inject delay, and I agree with you. We certainly should not be in the market for injecting delay. But when you think about court determinations of this type, they're certainly lengthy. They're not quick. Even the quickest of a special proceeding is not quick when you think of it in terms of, I want these documents by the time my planning committee application goes before the planning board. I want these environmental data, and I can't get them, or whatever it is that, And so it's something to consider as far as how much expertise is going to be required by whatever oversight board or entity there is ultimately established.
Yeah, just to respond to a couple things. In my experience, Shoshana, courts are not quick, not because these are big, complicated things, although sometimes they are. Courts are not quick because they have dockets of hundreds of other cases. And when you bring in Article 78, the judge might say, I'll come in 3 months and I'll try to read the papers. And then you go in and they say, well, I haven't had a chance to read the papers yet. So let's just set aside that. And I agree with you that you need a subject matter expertise, but the whole idea of the rationale of creating a centralized body is that you create a group of people who are experts in FOIA and can decide these things. They would have the same ability to question the parties that a judge does. And it doesn't have to be a big committee. And I'm not even necessarily advocating it be the Committee on Open Government. This is not like I'm trying to empower us. And I think it's in Pennsylvania, the way they do it is they have a specialized staff in the Attorney General's office. And so you can appeal to them. They assign it to one of their attorneys who investigates, and they issue formal opinions. And that group develops expertise over time. They can operate more quickly. They have kind of a sole focus. And you probably in the long run can save money as opposed to all the time and effort that's being done at every agency to have an administrative bureau. And the amount of cases that actually end up in litigation go down, so you have a benefit for the courts. And again, I don't minimize the issues that have to be addressed that you're raising, but I just think to go into it with the mindset of this is a terrible idea and it can't be solved isn't going to get us anywhere.
For sure not. I'm sort of suggesting that as we are currently structured, this entity is not yet equipped.
That's
Even
correct.
if we were to have been given the ability to go investigate, we don't have the personnel to
No, but what we do have in our charter is to focus on the specifics to make sure that the issue is clear so that those other people can look at it. Mm-hmm. And that's, because I'm agreeing with you both. That's what we want to do in our report.
Sure. We will sharpen up the previous more veiled trial balloons and see if we can't get some traction. We'll have everyone, in this room and those of us who aren't joining us today review it and give their thoughts and feedback and see if we can't get a consensus on how to approach that issue. And then I'll just tell you what we're hearing from bodies so far on 103A, which, as a reminder for those listening and maybe those of us in the room, is the amendment to the open meetings law that allows for continued remote meetings where you have an extraordinary circumstance. And the prerequisite would be that the quorum of the body is available in person like we are today, but that a member of a public body, if that person couldn't be present due to an extraordinary circumstance, we could continue to have a meeting and they could participate from whatever private location that they were in. What we've heard from bodies is panic and fear. There's a lot of requirements before you can implement that. We've as a body, we've just implemented it. That's great. So next time we may have an opportunity to rely on it if we need to. But most bodies, since the state of emergency the COVID emergency has been declared over, and the COVID emergency is the emergency that contained within it the suspension of the in-person requirement. That was specific to the open meetings law. There are other emergencies that are in place, but the COVID emergency that contained the suspension of the in-person requirement has been declared over. And that's only been very recent. So we've seen an uptick in the panic calls because I had a meeting scheduled for today, for tomorrow, and none of my people can be in person. Can we still have the meeting? No, you may not. We told you this was going to happen. Every 30 days, you got a new countdown clock. But so there's some scrambling happening now. But I get the sense that the sticking points are going to be the interpretation of that public hearing requirement, and that the form of the resolution that you guys authorized that we post as a model for other bodies, which we did post, has seen a lot of traffic. It is being actively distributed by representative groups, by bar associations. It's been reposted, it's been shared. I get calls for it a lot. The governor's office is using it to share with whoever asks. So we're likely to see an uptick in adoption of that resolution. The issue of whether a public hearing is accurately, held is, maybe we'll hear some more about that, some complaints about it, but mostly bodies want to get into the business of being able to participate to do remote meetings again, hoping that they can have a quorum. It's sort of like going to be a first come, first served situation where you can get your quorum and then all the extraordinary circumstances are going to start pouring in. And then it's going to be who is the first one in the door can get their extraordinary circumstance sort of internally validly approved by the public entity before they take advantage of it. So that's what I anticipate hearing more of, but our experience has largely been sort of a lack of understanding and panic. And even after reading the Q&A, which everyone says, oh my gosh, that's so helpful. Thank you for doing that Q&A. Here's my very fact-specific sub-question relating to me. And so we continue to get questions about it. And then, of course, by the time that we're done writing our required report next December on the implementation of this and the experience associated with Chapter 56, it's going to be deemed repealed, unless it's extended in July of 2020. I think July of 2024. So, we're on a cycle here of experimentation, and so I think this experiment is a challenge because it does represent a compromise of multiple viewpoints on the issue of remote meetings, and hopefully what we'll be able to put together next year will clarify where the real problems have been. Just speculating, I think it's going to be on the kind of each body doing the public hearing properly and implement the time it took to implement the resolution. That seems to be a challenge. And then the next thing would be the discretion that the body has on deciding what a circumstance is that's extraordinary. And then, finally, local states of emergency that can be declared to provide yet another reason to meet fully remotely that are potentially not consistent amongst jurisdictions. So those are the issues that I see potentially arising and that we've heard kind of bubblings of, but we'll see as that feedback continues to flow in. So David, algorithms.
So I can say a word or two about algorithms. We talked about it at our last meeting. I will say, I should know more about who's who on the new committee, but who replaced Joel?
Joel, the DOB is not here today. Joel is,
He's not.
Joel is still the representative,
He's right. He's just
but
not
he
here
is,
today.
he is just not here
Sorry.
today.
Sorry, I was thinking he was no longer. And I just asked because after the last meeting, I circulated some materials on algorithms and trade secrets and the problems they create as the law has changed how it thinks about trade secret status. And Joel apparently read it with great interest. He called me and he and I and one of his staffers had a long discussion a couple months ago. He thinks this is also, he agrees with me that this is a huge issue. And one of the things he's concerned about is just trying to understand, we don't even know the extent to which algorithms are used today. We know that they're used a lot in the courts and likely by police. And the issue I was raising is just the fact that algorithms more and more are being used to do government functions. I mentioned that the clinic I work with did a study in Connecticut to see if it's freedom of information law, what you could find out about algorithms using that law, which is very similar to New York's, and it was very frustrating. There were examples like the State Department of Education in Connecticut is under a court order to change the way it assigns students to magnet schools because of past patterns of discrimination. And they brought an algorithm to make those decisions. And there's no way for the public to know what the inputs are. How the algorithm, it just becomes a black box. And it's like, well, the black box made these decisions and therefore it must not be biased. And there's a lot of academic research that's been done that shows that that's not necessarily true. If you train the algorithm on how to weight factors based on past data, you're building in the bias. And under current laws, there's just no way really for the public to get at that. And so the thought was we should have a discussion of the problem, basically throw the ball to the legislature. There are various ways to deal with it. One is
I think we've
lost your
lost your audio. Just
sorry, can you hear me now?
yes.
Sorry. So there are various ways to deal with it. One is to think of it as a procurement issue and impose obligations on agencies that are going to buy algorithms to test them to meet certain standards, sort of like the analogy would be to an environmental impact statement. Before you do certain things, you got to think about what it's going to do. Another would be to impose obligations to test and monitor for bias that isn't being done now. So there's a number of ways to do it. Another way is to change the Freedom of Information Law, and particularly how you define what qualifies as a trade secret and can be withheld, and narrow it in ways that would allow at least some public understanding of how these algorithms work. Anyway, it's a big issue, and I'm not suggesting we have the answers or that we could even propose a specific solution, but I think we should be highlighting in the report and maybe giving some very concrete examples of problems that this has created, and there are many on the civil rights side in terms of policing, in terms of bail, in terms of other court decisions, court actions, I should say, to highlight that this is a very real problem that is kind of under the radar, and that the legislature is the body that needs to look into this, or they can, unless they want to give us a lot of money to hold hearings and do some fact finding, but I'm not advocating that. But someone needs to look at this because it is a problem.
I think one of the things that the more you pay attention to science is very humbling. When you take a look at climate models and climate simulations, the difficulty of understanding what a temperature is in a specific location is scientifically impossible statistically. In other words, if you're going to rely on statistics, you're going to be wrong. And that happens to be true with, when you're looking at your form about demographics, to suggest that one particular demographic happens to be significant when you leave out all the other things like cultural upbringing and everything else, it really should be humbling. And the reliance on AI ought to be very spare and very specific. I'm sure that sounded ambiguous, but.
No, well, I mean, I think, certainly, I think that to the extent that we can, collectively come up with a way of forwarding this issue, proposing it, discussing it, and then, I mean, obviously, I think our most important hook would be to say one way to approach it is through FOIL. I mean, I think that would be, obviously, we have to suggest that we're discussing it because there's at least one way to approach it is through FOIL.
I absolutely agree with you, because if there's one lesson in FOIL, it is to be cautious. And that's really what you're saying, is the purpose of FOIL is to assure that you are cautious in what you are doing. And so I agree with that.
Okay. Well, I think I understand better now the point, the issue and how we might raise it in the report, and we can take a crack at that. But I think we would probably want some input from you and maybe Joel have some thoughts, especially on the concrete examples in New York that we're trying to address. I could use Google, but perhaps you have something in mind that we might, use. And
I'd be happy to work with you to try to come up with some materials. And like I said, I think Joel would. He had thoughts that I didn't. And some of his concerns were not just about algorithms, but how trade secrets.
That's his focus.
They need to focus on that too. So
his FOIL practice is really focused on trade secrets, because he deals with the contracting issue that you raised sort of earlier. So sorry to talk about Joel when he's not here. I'm sure he'll forgive us all. And does anyone else have? Yes, Franklin.
Yeah, I do. Maybe it hasn't come to your attention, but on September 1st, 2 weeks ago, a whole host of good government groups, Citizens Budget Commission, Reinvent Albany, Citizens Union, League of Women Voters, sent a letter to the governor asking for an executive order requiring New York State agencies to annually update their transparency plans. And it seems to me that's something that we should consider popping into our report and having an opinion on. I can circulate, or I can send to you, and you can circulate the letters. I don't think we need to discuss every bit of it now, but it seems to me that ought to be a topic on our list of things to consider opining on.
Sure, I think that, I might be wrong about this, but my understanding of the transparency plans is that they were, they're new as of this administration.
Yes, September of 21.
No, oh yeah, okay, so I don't think they predated the current governor, but to the extent that they are now in existence, and this letter is a suggestion that they be updated and made public, we'll if that's what that calls for, then I'll be happy to, we'll discuss it.
That is what it calls for, and I'll send you the letters and we can circulate them.
Yeah, just, we can just reply all to the group that set up this meeting.
Okay.
And does,
I have one more, as long as we're at a little break. My memory was not as faulty. I apologize too soon. On the question of training. And the reason I bring it up is this is not trivial. Training is sort of at the heart of what we do. Kristen is of course right that in 2019 we only had 47 presentations, but that's the year that she and Candace functioned as one-armed paper hangers, keeping our agency together with 2 employees. In 2018 we had 77 presentations. In 2017 we had 60. In 2016 we had 88. In 2015 we had 91. So my recollection was that we were doing more than 1 a week, and that pretty clearly we were even close to 2 a week at one point. That suggests that there might be some agencies we have trained or entities we have trained in the past that we may not be reaching now. And so I just repeat my request that we go back, look at, every annual report has a list of a large number of the people that we spoke to or media outlets that we spoke to. And it just seems to me that would be a start to make sure we are doing as much training as we can possibly accommodate. And then I would go further and say, who are we missing? Who are we having problems with these appeals, to the extent that we can identify and offer up our training?
We absolutely will, and just remember, we still have 3 months left before those numbers are actual comparisons. I
don't think you're going to hit
I recognize,
91.
Franklin, that you have a strong preference for how things used to be, and we will try to
No,
replicate those things as they used to be to the extent that you feel comfortable with it. But as we move forward and as we offer more thousands and thousands more people from all different agencies, all different areas of the state, the training that they may not even have had in the past, it'll be very difficult for me to convince you that we're training everyone we used to train and that we're training them just as well. But trust me when I tell you that it is a focus of our program. It continues to be a focus of our program. And we will continue to do as much training as we possibly can. And we will go ahead and look and see if we've missed any of the people we previously trained. And we'll try to reach out and say, do you want this training in the future?
Please do not mischaracterize my statement as something that where I want to implement something in the past just because it was in the past. I think I've made a very clear point that we may not be training as many people as we could be training, and that's my point. I am not wedded to the past, except that we appeared to in the past have been reaching more different organizations than we seem to be reaching.
That remains to be seen, Franklin. We'll let you know when we get to the
That's
metrics.
what I'd
that
like.
you're on.
That's what
I
I'd
think
like.
if you look at the actual number of individuals trained, you'll see that it's significantly higher.
I don't think that there's any disagreement.
I'm agreeing with that. My point is that we may be having more people within, you may be having a very big group that's attending an online, but you may be missing some of the agencies that we've spoken to in the past, and you may be missing some we've never spoken to. I just want my point to be clear and not mischaracterized. I'm not into the past for the sake of the past. Please, give me some
I don't
credit.
think that there's any disagreement on either side of the goal of the organization. And I just recall that, 50 years ago when I was on the swimming team, I always felt that I came into the beginning of practice in great shape and learned lots of things from the coaches during that training that made me even better. And we're all on the same side and on the same team in that.
Good.
Does anyone else have information that they'd like to add for the discussion of what we might put in our annual report? Okay, what I would propose on that is that we get started with drafting those ideas that we've talked about today. And obviously looking at the last couple of annual reports to see if there's other issues that we need to continue to focus on that may not have progressed to the extent that we were hopeful for. And then we put together some kind of a draft for the next time we get together, so that we can discuss it and continue to fine tune the thinking. Again, this will require some interactive, further conceptualization, David, potentially with that group on that, at least that one issue, and we'll put forward whatever we can consistent with our discussion today and whatever we learn as we go forward. And then we'll propose it to the group and we'll have a meeting where we'll discuss it. So with that in mind, we'll kind of solicit dates for a new meeting. Does anyone have an idea? I mean, I think that I would suggest at least 4 weeks that we take before we meet again, so that we can gather those things together and get a meaningful draft together by that time. So just be prepared to hear from Candace on, getting dates in I would say mid-October for that. So we'll target that time frame. And with that, we would like to open it up to requests for people joining us either online or in the room there. The one person who's joined us in the room to make any comment that they would like to make. I think what we've agreed in the past is that we have a 3-minute per comment time provided, and so we would just take it in the order that the requests might come in. And I will let Kristen, who's looking at those potentially online, to tell us if we have a queue online.
I know we had one guest in the room. I guess we'll open up to the person who's in New York City if they offer it to them first, and then I'll kind of go through and look through the.
No pressure.
No pressure, though. Just.
How many
noting that
people do
have
we
one-
have online, Kristen?
10. I'm looking for hands up in terms of people who are interested in speaking.
You want to get
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
picture?
Why don't you come
Yeah.
over
Am I on
here, stay
audio?
at the table?
Please,
Yeah.
Okay.
just join us in here, by all means.
Great, so it's now fine.
Yes, of
Okay,
course.
yeah, so Tom Speaker, Reanna, Albany. So I guess the only thing I'll say is the topic did come up of putting in data on, 1,300 appeals from agencies and maybe including something about that or more details about that in the report. And we think that'd be great to see. We've pointed out, I think, in previous letters and memos that we've written that on the federal level, DOJ does take that information together and release an annual report on agency data in the federal government. And that's kind of missing on the New York State level. And there's different theories about what would be the best way to do that. If individual agencies should issue reports or a single agency should do it. But we definitely support including that kind of data to the extent possible from Coog, and then just having more conversations about what would be the best way to approach that. So that's all.
You can stay in the circle if you like. I didn't know that. Yes. Also, have you had an opportunity to sign? Did you sign this? Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker, I'm going to unmute Michelle A. You're welcome to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Michelle. I am a member of the board of directors of one of the government groups that helped issue that letter, and I appeared on the show with the executive director, the PBS show. So to be concise, I hear a lot of specifics about remote meetings, but has the committee made any recommendations or given thought to a hybrid model? As I previously stated, the state really should look at national best practices, as was mentioned in the discussion about some sort of enforcement or over more of expanding powers beyond advisory. That maybe the committee could make recommendations for mandating fines for repeated violations once these annual reports are issued. Would or could the Committee on Open Government be willing to do that? I also hear lots of discussion about FOIL enforcement, but nothing about open meetings law, which in many other states, they go hand in hand, they're tandem, they work together. And that perhaps that really should be considered to expand that to encompass both open meeting law and FOIL. Also, too, I've heard many conversations about vacant seats on the committee. Have those been filled? And is anyone other than appointments from state bodies or legislative bodies being considered? Is there any member from a public agency or open government group or good government group, or just from the public, not from appointments? Does the Committee on Open Government have any auditing of compliance? I heard that as a discussion, but if the committee doesn't, then who might? Does anybody in the state do any type of auditing for compliance with these laws? It just seems, as was discussed, that it's extremely cumbersome for any member of the public to be able to file an Article 78, which is the only recourse for any individual going up against any agency or entity to have their request completely followed. And one of the gentlemen, I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names, mentioned Ohio and Pennsylvania as some models to look at. Indiana is another one to look at. The Indiana Public Access Counselor was recently highlighted at the NFOIC, the National Freedom of Information Coalition Summit, and for his unique quasi-judicial position. He is one person and does not have very many resources, but quite often is very successful at mitigating these situations outside of court. And again, and that's all I have. Thank you for the passionate discussion and everybody's input and work that is done on this very important matter. Thank you.
Didn't mean that to be quite so loud, sorry. Okay. Our next speaker is Miriam Snyder.
Good afternoon. Good morning. I just wanted to.
Sorry, we need to have you speak up.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Yes, now we can.
I was listening. I just want to know, how do the algorithms and the trade secrets facilitate open government and transparency?
I'm sorry, we're not answering questions during this time, but if you would like to speak, you have an opportunity to speak, but we won't be answering questions during this period.
Oh, I thought this was question and answer. Sorry.
No.
Why can't we answer questions?
Franklin, if you'd like to answer a question, you go ahead.
Well, I suspect that Dave might have a response.
I could just say briefly that the problem is that algorithms and trade secrets don't foster transparency. The whole purpose of a trade secret is to keep things secret, and one of the problems that we're trying to grapple with is the trade secret status of algorithms, which are being purchased to make governmental decisions, to do governmental business, and we don't have adequate tools currently to understand what they're doing, how they're doing, and whether they are performing as anticipated. And that's the issue we're trying to look at.
So they don't facilitate open government.
They can facilitate government in many great ways, but they're not inherently transparent.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Mark. I'm going to unmute Mark.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to make a brief comment. I wanted to relay an experience I have with a FOIL request to the Office of Cannabis Management. I was interested in regulations, proposed regulations. I was signed up for their mailing list. I never got a notice that the proposed regulations were published in the register, in the state register, so I completely missed the comment period, being very busy in my life. At that point, I realized that it would be advantageous for me to know the scope of comments, the 60 comments that I found out had been submitted. And so I tried to find the comments which weren't available. I put in a FOIL request for the comments, was informed within the 5-day period that I would have to wait 60 days for a response. And about a week before the 60 days, I was informed that I would have to wait at least another 30 days for a response. At that point, it was completely moot that I even get the comments, given that the comment period had expired. And so what this led me to wonder is, shouldn't open government be open? And is having to file FOIL requests actually a disincentive for agencies to publish information? Because frankly, I don't understand why public comments weren't available without filing a FOIL request. So, maybe that's something that could be considered as part of your mission, is to encourage agencies to, anyway, if anyone can comment on why public comments aren't available on the Office of Cannabis Management's website without a FOIL request, that seems pretty efficient. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Just comment, not on the specifics of Mark's comment, because I don't know anything about that agency or this circumstance, but in the entire, now many, many years I've served on this committee, there, not a single year has gone by where we haven't had many discussions about the desirability of suggesting and encouraging agencies to push information rather than wait for FOIL requests.
Yes, right, but I think it is one of those areas where we're probably going to reprise the proactive disclosure discussion that we generally have.
Yeah.
That is it for our online commenters, so we're done with the public comment period.
So do we have any new business from members who wish to raise it? No. All right then. It is 11:29, and can I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second. Okay, any objections? No, hearing none. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. We will.
Thank you, Lashana.
Thank you.
Yeah.